Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. It is the most sacred object in all of Christianity, the very wood upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. Known as the True Cross, its discovery was a miraculous event that changed history. But today, fragments of this cross are scattered in churches all over the world. Are any of them real? Or is this the story of the Vatican's biggest and most successful hoax? The story of the True Cross, the most sacred and revered physical object in all of Christianity, does not begin, as one might expect, in the dusty, sun-baked, and politically charged landscape of first-century Judea at the time of Jesus. Instead, its documented, traceable history, the powerful story that has been passed down through generations for nearly 1,700 years, begins 3 long centuries later, in an era of monumental, earth-shaking change for the entire Western world. It is a story born from the dynamic and potent intersection of absolute imperial power, profound and unwavering personal faith, and the determined, singular quest of one extraordinary and influential woman. To truly understand the origin of the countless fragments of wood that would eventually be venerated as holy relics in the grandest cathedrals and humblest churches across the globe, we must first travel back in our minds to the 4th century. This was a time when the once persecuted and secretive Christian faith was finally and dramatically stepping out of the shadows of the catacombs and into the very heart of the Roman Empire, supported by the emperor himself. The discovery of the True Cross is therefore not a cold, sterile, archaeological finding. It is a dramatic and miraculous tale, a foundational legend of the faith, centered on the incredible and arduous pilgrimage of Helena, the mother of the first Christian Roman emperor, Constantine the Great. Our story begins with the compelling figure of Helena herself, a woman whose life was a testament to the unpredictable nature of power and faith in the Roman world. She was a woman of humble, almost obscure, origins who had risen to a position of immense and unprecedented influence as the Augusta, or Empress Dowager, of the Roman Empire. Born into a lower-class family in the Greek-speaking eastern provinces, likely as a stablemate or innkeeper's daughter, her life was irrevocably transformed when she caught the eye of a rising Roman officer named Constantius. She became his consort and gave birth to a son, Constantine, a boy who would grow up to become one of the most consequential figures in all of history. Constantine would go on to reunite a fractured and chaotic Roman Empire, establish a new capital in the East, and most significantly, convert to Christianity, a decision that would forever alter the course of Western civilization. Helena herself, likely influenced by her son's conversion, became a devout and deeply pious Christian in her later years. After having lived through decades of brutal political turmoil and the last great waves of Roman religious persecution against Christians, she was driven by a powerful and personal desire to connect with the very roots of her newfound faith. Around the year 326 AD, at an age when most people of her standing would be content with a quiet and luxurious retirement, she was likely approaching 80 years old. Helena embarked on a grand, arduous, and historic pilgrimage. With the full, unconditional backing and the immense financial and military resources of her son, the emperor, she traveled to the Holy Land, to the Roman province of Palestine. Her mission was a deeply sacred one, to use the power of the empire to find and identify the most important and holy sites of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Her goal was to reclaim these locations from neglect and obscurity and to honor them with the construction of magnificent churches, transforming them into permanent and glorious destinations for Christian pilgrimage. Her imperial quest eventually brought her to the city of Jerusalem, a place that had undergone profound and violent changes in the 3 centuries that had passed since the time of Christ. Following a second major Jewish revolt against Rome in the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Hadrian had systematically and brutally tried to erase the city's unique Jewish and Christian identity. He had razed much of the old city and rebuilt it as a model Roman pagan city, renamed Aelia Capitolina. According to the early Christian historian Eusebius of Caesarea, a contemporary who wrote extensively about the works of both Constantine and Helena, this new pagan city was constructed quite literally on top of the old, sacred sites of the Christians and Jews. When Helena arrived, she began to make detailed inquiries with the local Christian community, which had managed to survive through the centuries of persecution. She was seeking to locate the precise site of the crucifixion, known in the Gospels as Golgotha, the Aramaic name for the place of the skull. She was told a story of deliberate and calculated religious desecration. The local oral tradition, passed down through generations, held that Emperor Hadrian, in a specific and calculated move to suppress the growing Christian cult that revered the site, had ordered the place of the crucifixion and the nearby tomb of Christ to be buried under a massive, artificial earthen terrace. To further profane the location and to prevent any future Christian worship, he had then constructed a large and prominent pagan temple dedicated to the Roman goddess, Venus, the goddess of carnal love and lust, directly on top of this sacred ground. For over a century, the very place of Christ's ultimate sacrifice had been buried, dishonored, and its sacred memory intentionally obscured by a temple dedicated to one of the most worldly of Roman pagan deities. This act of imperial desecration, however, had an unintended and deeply ironic consequence. By its very nature, it had perfectly preserved the location for posterity. By building a massive, permanent, and well-known public structure on top of the site, Hadrian had inadvertently created a landmark, ensuring that the memory of what lay beneath would not be lost to the shifting sands of time. Armed with this powerful local knowledge and with the supreme, unquestionable authority of her son, the Emperor of Rome, Helena gave a monumental order. The pagan temple of Venus, which had stood for over a century, was to be torn down, every single stone of it removed and cleansed from the holy site. She then commanded that the massive earthen platform be excavated, a colossal and labor-intensive undertaking that would have required a huge workforce of Roman soldiers and local laborers. Her goal was clear and twofold. First, to uncover the holy tomb, the sepulchre, where Christ's body had been laid to rest, and second, if at all possible, to find the physical instruments of the Passion itself, most importantly, the wooden cross upon which he had been crucified. This was not just a simple archaeological dig. It was a profoundly sacred act of restoration, a powerful and symbolic reclamation of holy ground for the newly triumphant and officially sanctioned Christian faith. The story of what happened next, as the excavation proceeded, is not recorded as a dry, historical report but has been passed down to us as a legend filled with high drama, suspense, and divine intervention. The most famous and complete versions of this story are told by later Christian historians, such as Socrates, Scholasticus, and Sozomen, who wrote in the 5th century, drawing upon the earlier traditions. As the workers dug deeper and deeper into the earth, clearing away the centuries of dirt, rubble, and refuse from an old, disused cistern located near the now uncovered tomb, they made a startling and momentous discovery. They unearthed not one, but 3 weathered, ancient wooden crosses, all buried together in the damp earth. The immediate assumption among Helena and her entourage was that these were the 3 crosses from the day of the crucifixion, the cross of Jesus and the crosses of the 2 thieves who, according to the Gospels, were crucified on either side of him. This incredible discovery, however, presented a profound and immediate theological problem. The 3 crosses were found together in a heap, with no distinguishing marks or signs to identify which one was the sacred relic they were so desperately searching for. They all looked like simple, crude, weathered wooden beams, the rough and ready instruments of a common and brutal Roman execution. How could they possibly determine which of these was the one true cross, the wood that had been sanctified by the blood and body of Christ? To solve this divine puzzle, the Bishop of Jerusalem, a man named Macarius, who was overseeing the sacred excavation alongside the Empress Helena, proposed a direct and definitive testa trial by miracle. The legend, as it is told, unfolds with immense and theatrical drama. A prominent local woman, who was known throughout the city to be suffering from a terminal illness and was on the verge of death, was brought to the excavation site. Her presence created a moment of intense, silent, and prayerful anticipation among the assembled crowd of dignitaries, workers, and local Christians. As directed by Bishop Macarius, the ailing woman was brought forward to touch the first of the 3 excavated crosses, but there was no effect. Her grave condition remained unchanged. She was then led to the second cross, and again, she reached out and touched the wood, and again, nothing happened. The tension and doubt in the air must have been immense. Finally, she was brought to the third and final cross. As her frail hand made contact with the aged, dark wood, the legend states that she was instantly and miraculously healed, completely and visibly restored to perfect health before the eyes of the entire astonished crowd. This powerful and public divine sign was the irrefutable proof they needed. The third cross was unequivocally identified as the true cross of Christ. The discovery was immediately celebrated as a monumental triumph, a divinely ordained affirmation of the Christian faith's victory over paganism and a testament to the profound piety of the Empress Helena. The legend, as recorded by these ancient historians, continues with another important and corroborating detail. Along with the 3 crosses, a separate, smaller piece of wood was reportedly found in the same cistern. This was believed to be the Titulus Crucis, the very sign that the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, had ordered to be placed at the top of Jesus' cross as a public declaration of his crime. According to the Gospel of John, this sign was inscribed in 3 of the major languages of the Roman Empire: Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, with the mocking, yet in Christian eyes, deeply prophetic words, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The discovery of this inscribed sign, separate from the crosses but found in close proximity to them, was seen as further, powerful confirmation of the site's authenticity. While some versions of the legend say the sign was found still attached to the true cross, the more common and perhaps more historically plausible account is that it was found nearby, having likely fallen off as the wood aged and deteriorated over the course of 3 centuries in the damp earth. A large portion of a wooden sign, claimed to be this very Titulus, is still preserved and venerated in a basilica in Rome to this day, the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. Having made this world-altering discovery, a discovery that would echo through the centuries, the Empress Helena now faced the momentous question of what to do with such an incredibly sacred and powerful object. She decided, with great and celebrated wisdom, not to take the entire cross back with her to Rome as a personal trophy of her pilgrimage. It was far too important a relic to be confined to a single location. Instead, she made the crucial decision to divide the holy wood into 3 main parts, ensuring that its sanctity and its protective power would be shared among the most important and strategic centers of the Christian Roman Empire. The first, and arguably the largest and most significant, portion of the true cross remained in its rightful and historical home, the holy city of Jerusalem. Helena commissioned the construction of a magnificent new church complex, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to be built directly over the sites of both Golgotha and the newly uncovered tomb. The relic of the cross was then enshrined within this glorious new basilica, where it would be protected by the Patriarch of Jerusalem and venerated by countless thousands of pilgrims for centuries to come. A second major part was sent by Helena to her beloved son, Emperor Constantine, in his new and burgeoning capital city of Constantinople. This portion of the cross became the most sacred and politically important relic in the entire Byzantine Empire, the ultimate symbol of its divine protection and imperial power, housed within the imperial palace itself. The third major part of the cross, along with the other precious relics she had discovered, such as the Titulus Crucis and the holy nails believed to have been used in the crucifixion, she brought back with her to Rome, the old and still beating heart of the empire. She housed these sacred objects in her private chapel within her Caesarean palace, which was later consecrated and converted into the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, where it remains a major pilgrimage site to this day. Helena's grand and sacred quest was now complete. She had not only rediscovered and reclaimed the lost holy places of her faith, but she had also recovered the most precious physical object in all of Christendom, ensuring its preservation and veneration for all future generations. Her pilgrimage had irrevocably transformed the Christian world, cementing the historical sites of the faith and beginning the long, complex, and deeply mysterious history of the world's most sacred, and now most contentious, relic. The miraculous discovery of the true cross by the Empress Helena in the hallowed ground of the Holy Land was not, by any means, the end of its extraordinary story. It was merely the beginning of a new, dynamic, and profoundly influential chapter. The unearthing of this sacred wood from its 3-century-long slumber transformed it almost overnight from a forgotten, humble instrument of Roman execution into the single most powerful, revered, and sought-after physical object in the rapidly growing Christian world. The immediate aftermath of its discovery set in motion a long, complex, and fascinating process of veneration, division, and distribution, a process that would see tiny fragments of this one singular cross spread to every corner of the Christian empire and, eventually, far beyond. This was not the story of a single, static relic, jealously guarded and kept under lock and key in one location. Instead, it became the story of a dynamic and living tradition, a sacred economy of faith and power, a process that allowed the sanctity of the cross to be shared, gifted, leveraged for political gain, and sometimes, tragically, fought over and lost. The epic journey of these countless fragments through the currents of history is what explains how a single wooden cross, found in a forgotten cistern in Jerusalem, became a truly global phenomenon. And in doing so, this very process of division and proliferation sets the stage for the deep and persistent questions of authenticity that haunt the relic to this very day. Alongside the dramatic and miraculous discovery of the 3 crosses, the ancient historical accounts, such as those by Rufinus and Sozomen, tell of another crucial and corroborating finding that day, a separate, smaller piece of wood that was immediately identified as the Titulus Crucis. This was believed to be the actual, historical sign that the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, had personally ordered to be nailed to the top of Jesus' cross as a public notice of his alleged crime. The Gospel of John provides the most specific detail about this sign, stating that it was inscribed in 3 of the major languages of the Roman Empire: Hebrew, for the local Jewish population, Latin, the official language of Roman law, and Greek, the common language of commerce and culture in the eastern provinces. The inscription itself was both mocking and, in the eyes of Christians, deeply and prophetically titled, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The discovery of this inscribed plaque, with its partial inscriptions in these 3 languages still reportedly legible, was seen as powerful, almost legalistic, corroborating evidence for the authenticity of the entire find. It was a piece of historical documentation, a legal notice from the Roman authorities, that had miraculously survived for 3 centuries alongside the instrument of execution itself. While some romanticized versions of the legend say the Titulus was found still attached to the true cross, the more common and historically plausible account is that it was found nearby in the same cistern, having likely fallen off as the wood aged and the iron nails rusted and deteriorated over time. This small, inscribed plank of wood immediately became a holy relic of immense importance in its own right. A large portion of a wooden plaque, claimed by tradition to be this very Titulus, was brought back to Rome by Helena. It is still preserved and venerated today in its own special chapel within the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, a silent, wooden witness to the events not only of the crucifixion itself, but also of its momentous rediscovery by the pious empress. Having made this world-altering discovery, and having positively identified the one true cross through the power of a divine miracle, the Empress Helena, with the Theological Council of Bishop Macarius of Jerusalem, faced the critical and momentous question of what to do with such an incredibly sacred, powerful, and politically significant object. She understood with great clarity that a relic of this ultimate magnitude could not, and should not, be confined to a single, exclusive location. Its profound spiritual power, she believed, was something that needed to be shared among the great and strategic centers of the newly Christianized Roman Empire. With great wisdom and keen political foresight, she made the pivotal decision to divide the Holy Wood into three main parts, thereby establishing three primary points of veneration from which its influence, and the influence of her son's imperial authority, could radiate throughout the world. The first, and arguably the largest and most spiritually significant, portion of the True Cross remained in its rightful and historical home, the Holy City of Jerusalem. As a fitting shrine, Helena ordered the construction of a magnificent new church complex, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to be built directly over the newly excavated sites of both Golgotha and the Tomb of Christ. This grand basilica would become the most sacred and important pilgrimage site in all of Christendom. The precious relic of the cross was enshrined within this glorious new church, encased in a beautiful and secure silver reliquary, where it would be protected by the Patriarch of Jerusalem and venerated by countless thousands of devout pilgrims for centuries to come. A second major part of the True Cross was carefully prepared and sent by Helena as a gift of immense significance to her son, Emperor Constantine, in his new, burgeoning capital city of Constantinople, which he was aggressively building to be the New Rome, the undisputed center of the Christian world. This portion of the cross was received with immense ceremony and public celebration and became the most sacred and powerful political relic in the entire Byzantine Empire. It was housed within the imperial palace itself and was seen as the ultimate palladium, a divine protector of the city and the entire empire. Its very presence was believed to guarantee military victory, ward off plagues, and signify God's direct and personal favor for the Byzantine emperors. The third major part of the cross, along with the other precious relics she had discovered, including the titulus crucis and the holy nails believed to have been used in the crucifixion, Helena brought back with her to Rome, the old, still venerated heart of the empire. She housed these sacred objects in her private chapel within her Caesarean palace, which was later consecrated by the Pope and transformed into the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, so named because Helena had ordered soil brought back from the Holy Land to be spread upon its floor. These three great cities, the historical center of Jerusalem, the new imperial capital of Constantinople, and the old seat of power in Rome, thus became the three primary, authenticated, and legitimate sources for all future relics of the True Cross. From these three main, hallowed locations, the True Cross began its long, intricate, and often politically motivated journey of division and proliferation across the Christian world. For over 1,000 years, a new and powerful tradition emerged. The act of giving a tiny splinter or a small fragment of the True Cross became the ultimate gesture of imperial or papal favor, a tool of high-level diplomacy. Emperors in Constantinople, popes in Rome, and patriarchs in Jerusalem would bestow these incredibly precious gifts upon other kings, queens, powerful dukes, and influential bishops as a means to seal political alliances, to reward unwavering loyalty, to settle disputes, or to sanctify a new, important church or monastery. A gift of a piece of the True Cross was a gift of immeasurable spiritual and political value, a sign that the recipient was held in the highest possible esteem. This process of division, at least in the early centuries, happened slowly, carefully, and reverently. Tiny slivers of the precious would be carefully removed from the main relics by high-ranking clergy and then encased in beautiful, incredibly ornate reliquaries made of gold, silver, ivory, and precious gems. These reliquaries, known as storotheques, were often masterpieces of Byzantine and medieval art in their own right, exquisitely designed to honor the sacred fragment they contained. As Christianity spread like wildfire throughout Europe during the Middle Ages, the desire to possess a piece of the True Cross grew exponentially, becoming a near obsession for many communities. Owning such a first-class relic became the ultimate status symbol for medieval cities, their cathedrals, their monasteries, and the noble rulers who patronized them. It was fervently believed that the physical presence of even the tiniest fragment of the cross granted divine protection to an entire city, could perform healing miracles for the sick, and, not insignificantly, would draw in vast numbers of pilgrims. These pilgrims, in turn, brought with them not only their deep piety, but also their wealth, which helped to fund the construction of ever grander churches and support the local economy. Great and magnificent cathedrals, like the famous Notre Dame in Paris, were built specifically to house these tiny fragments, which often became the spiritual and economic heart of the entire community. The precious relic would be brought out for public veneration on special feast days, particularly on Good Friday, in elaborate and emotional ceremonies that drew enormous crowds from hundreds of miles around. This immense and insatiable demand for relics of the true cross, coupled with the slow but steady division and distribution of the original pieces from the three great cities, led to a massive proliferation of fragments across the entire continent. From the cathedrals of Spain to the abbeys of England, from the imperial chapels of Germany to the basilicas of Italy, hundreds upon hundreds of churches and monasteries proudly and fervently claimed to possess a genuine piece of the wood from Christ's crucifixion, each with its own cherished story of how it was acquired from a pope, a king, a returning crusader, or a Byzantine prince. While the portions of the cross held securely in Rome and Constantinople remained relatively safe within the heavily fortified centers of power, the largest, most historically significant, and most accessible portion, the one that had remained in Jerusalem, had a far more turbulent, violent, and ultimately tragic history. As the Holy Land became a permanent and bloody flashpoint for conflict between Christianity and its rivals, the relic of the cross became more than just an object of veneration. It became a potent symbol of the ongoing struggle. It was transformed into a battle standard, a physical embodiment of God's favor that was carried into the heart of battle at the head of Christian armies, in the belief that its presence would guarantee victory. In the year 614 AD, this sacred relic was captured when the Sasanian Persians, under their great king Khosrau II, conquered Jerusalem and sacked the city. The loss of the cross was a devastating blow to the morale and theology of the entire Christian world. It was a profound crisis of faith. For 15 long years, the cross remained in Persian hands until it was triumphantly recaptured by the great Byzantine Emperor Heraclius in the year 629. In a moment of immense historical symbolism, Heraclius personally and humbly carried the relic back into Jerusalem in a grand procession, an event that is still celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. The cross remained the undisputed centerpiece of Christian worship in Jerusalem for several more centuries, even after the city fell under the generally tolerant rule of the early Islamic caliphates. However, its final, documented appearance in history came during the tumultuous time of the Crusades. The Crusader Knights, who had conquered Jerusalem in 1099 and established the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, revered the relic above all others. Like the Byzantines before them, they carried it into battle as their most sacred standard, their ultimate source of divine inspiration and protection. This pious but reckless practice would lead directly to its ultimate downfall. On the fateful day of July 4th, 1187, at the catastrophic Battle of Hattin, the Crusader army, exhausted and outmaneuvered, suffered a devastating and decisive defeat at the hands of the brilliant Muslim Sultan, Saladin. The relic of the true cross, which had been carried into the heart of the desperate and brutal battle, was captured by Saladin's victorious forces. This time, it would not be recovered. The loss of the true cross at Hattin was a crushing, final blow to the Crusader states and to the morale of all Christendom. It was widely interpreted as a clear sign that God had abandoned their cause. After its capture by Saladin, this largest and most historically important piece of the true cross vanished from the historical record forever. Its ultimate fate remains a complete mystery. Some contemporary accounts say Saladin had it destroyed as an idol, while others believe it may have been broken up and sold for its silver reliquary, or perhaps is still hidden away somewhere, a lost treasure waiting to be found. With the permanent loss of the Jerusalem portion, the relics remaining in Constantinople and Rome, and the hundreds of smaller fragments scattered across Europe, became the sole remaining tangible links to Helena's miraculous discovery, each tiny piece now carrying with it the immense and heavy weight of a long, complex, and often violent history. For over 1,000 years, a vast and sweeping period of history stretching from the time of its celebrated discovery by the Empress Helena in the 4th century to the dawn of the European Renaissance in the 15th. The deep and widespread veneration of the true cross and its many distributed fragments was an almost completely unquestioned and absolutely central part of Christian life and worship in Europe. These small, precious splinters of dark, ancient wood, housed reverently and with great ceremony in their magnificent, jewel-encrusted reliquaries, were seen by the faithful not as mere symbols or reminders, but as direct, physical conduits to the divine. They were understood to be tangible points of contact with the very sacrifice of their Savior, objects imbued with a sacred and miraculous power. But the powerful and seemingly immutable tide of history, which had carried the veneration of the cross to such great heights, was about to turn, and turn dramatically. The late Middle Ages, an era marked by devastating plagues, incessant wars, and deep social schisms, gradually gave way to an age of profound intellectual, spiritual, and political upheaval, an age of renewed questioning, of sharp-edged skepticism born from the new learning of humanism, and ultimately, of sweeping, continent-spanning revolution. The long and storied history of the true cross was about to enter a new and deeply contentious phase, a period in which it would be transformed from a universally revered and sacred relic into a prime exhibit, a star witness, in a powerful and damning public argument against the spiritual authority, the theological doctrines, and the institutional practices of the Roman Catholic Church. This was the turbulent and transformative era of the Protestant Reformation, a time when the very idea of venerating holy relics came under fierce, sustained, and intellectually rigorous attack. And the true cross, as the most famous and widespread relic of them all, found itself at the absolute, unavoidable center of a raging firestorm of controversy, accused of being not a sacred object of faith, but the deceptive and fraudulent centerpiece of a grand, lucrative, and centuries-old hoax. The deeply rooted and systemic problem that would eventually engulf the true cross in this ferocious storm of doubt had been quietly and insidiously brewing for many centuries. By the late Middle Ages, the genuine and popular devotion to holy relics among the common people had metastasized into a massive and often deeply, cynically corrupt industry. The sincere, heartfelt piety of the faithful, their deep-seated and very human desire for a tangible, physical connection to God and the saints, created an enormous and insatiable demand for these sacred objects. And where there is immense demand in any society, a market, both legitimate and illegitimate, will always spring up to supply it. An entire, complex, and largely unregulated economy, complete with international suppliers, traveling traders, and wealthy private collectors, emerged around the acquisition, authentication, and sale of holy relics. Unscrupulous traders and traveling hucksters, figures like the morally bankrupt Pardones, who were famously and brilliantly satirized by Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, traveled from town to town, from village to village, preying on the unwavering faith and the fears of the common folk. They sold, for a handsome price, what they claimed were the authenticated and miracle-working bones of the apostles, fragments of the Virgin Mary's precious veil, sacred hairs from John the Baptist's beard, or even, in the most absurd and blatant examples, feathers plucked from the wings of the Archangel Gabriel. For every single authentic, historically documented, first-class relic that was reverently housed in a great and powerful cathedral like Chartres or Cologne, there were likely hundreds, if not thousands, of blatant and often cheaply made forgeries being sold to smaller, less sophisticated parish churches, to wealthy but gullible noble patrons, and to unsuspecting individual pilgrims who had saved for years to make their journey. This widespread and often blatant fraud, which many local church officials and bishops either willfully ignored or quietly profited from through the sale of indulgences and the promotion of pilgrimages, created a deep and growing undercurrent of cynicism and doubt among an increasingly educated and critical laity. People were beginning to question whether the objects they were being asked to venerate were, in fact, genuine. And more pointedly, they began to ask the dangerous question of whether the institutional church itself, with its complex and often opaque system of indulgences and its insatiable need for funds to build ever grander cathedrals and palaces, was complicit in this mass deception for its own financial and political gain. The entire, elaborate system of relics, which for centuries had been a source of profound, unifying faith and genuine communal comfort, was becoming dangerously tainted with the corrosive and spreading suspicion of widespread and systemic corruption. This simmering, widespread discontent, which had been steadily building for generations across Europe, finally and spectacularly boiled over in the early 16th century with the advent of the Protestant Reformation. A new generation of bold, charismatic, and highly educated religious thinkers reformers like the fiery Martin Luther in Germany, the radical Ulrich Zwingli in Switzerland, and the systematic and brilliant John Calvin in France launched a powerful, sweeping, and intellectually rigorous critique of the core doctrines and the everyday practices of the Catholic Church. Among their many targets, the veneration of holy relics was one of the most prominent and most vociferous. They saw the entire practice not as an act of genuine piety that could lead one closer to God, but as a dangerous and biblically forbidden form of idolatry, a regression into the pagan superstitions of the past. It was, in their view, a dangerous and worldly distraction from the true and only path to worship God, which they argued could only be achieved through personal faith, divine grace, and a direct, unmediated engagement with the Holy Scriptures. They argued forcefully and publicly that praying before a piece of bone, a lock of hair, or a splinter of wood was a direct and grave violation of the biblical commandments against worshiping graven images. And it was in this highly charged and revolutionary theological context that the true cross, precisely because of its immense fame and its ubiquitous presence in churches across Europe, became a central and unavoidable focal point of their criticism. Of all the thousands of relics in Christendom, it was the most famous, the most widespread, and therefore, in their eyes, the most egregious, undeniable, and indefensible example of this systemic, deeply rooted problem. It was the brilliant and formidable French reformer, John Calvin, a man known for his sharp, logical mind and his powerful, incisive prose, who would deliver the most famous, most devastating, and most enduringly powerful attack on the authenticity of the countless fragments of the true cross. In his influential 1543 treatise, titled simply, A Treatise on Relics, Calvin marshaled his arguments with the sharp precision of a prosecuting lawyer and the fiery passion of an Old Testament prophet. He systematically and mercilessly went through the long list of popular and venerated relics of his time, exposing with cold logic the many absurdities, historical impossibilities, and theological contradictions associated with them. But he reserved his most scathing, memorable, and devastating criticism for the most sacred relic of all, the true cross. He famously, and with biting, unforgettable sarcasm, wrote that if all the so-called fragments of the true cross that were being venerated as authentic in the countless churches, abbeys, and monasteries across the length and breadth of Europe were to be gathered together in one place, there would be enough wood to fill the entire cargo hold of a large merchant ship. He then continued his relentless assault with specific, pointed examples. There is no abbey so poor that it does not have a specimen. In some places, there are large fragments, as in the Holy Chapel in Paris. In others, a whole crucifix has been made from it. In brief, if all the pieces that could be found were collected together, they would make a big shipload. Yet, the Gospel testifies that a single man was able to carry it. This single, powerful, and easily visualized statement became the ultimate and most effective popular argument against the authenticity of the cross fragments. It was a brilliant and devastating piece of rhetoric, vivid, simple enough for a common person to immediately understand, and deeply, profoundly damning. The mental image of a massive shipload of wood, all claiming to come from a single, man-portable cross, perfectly and unforgettably encapsulated the perceived absurdity and the sheer, incredible scale of the relic tradition's excesses. Calvin's accusation went viral, spreading like wildfire throughout Europe thanks to the revolutionary new technology of the printing press, and it quickly became a cornerstone of the Protestant critique of Catholic superstition and perceived corruption. It created a popular and enduring image in the public consciousness of a ridiculous and impossible overabundance of fake relics, powerfully suggesting that the entire tradition was not just a matter of a few isolated, local forgeries, but a massive, institutional-level hoax, either deliberately orchestrated or negligently allowed to flourish by a greedy and deceitful Catholic Church. For centuries to come, whenever the authenticity of the true cross was debated, Calvin's shipload of wood argument would inevitably be raised by skeptics as the definitive, common-sense proof that it was all a fraudulent fantasy. The burden of proof in this debate had now shifted dramatically and permanently. It was no longer enough for the Church to simply possess and display its most sacred relics. It now had to actively and publicly defend their very possibility against this powerful, persuasive, and relentless attack. Faced with the powerful theological arguments of the Reformers, which were winning converts across Northern Europe, and the very real and undeniable problem of forgeries proliferating within its own ranks, the Catholic Church was forced to respond. The Protestant Reformation, which threatened to tear the very fabric of Western Christendom apart, triggered a period of intense and sweeping internal reform within Catholicism, a powerful movement that came to be known as the Counter-Reformation. At the very heart of this ambitious movement was the Council of Trent, a series of momentous and often contentious meetings of bishops and cardinals held between the years 1545 and 1563, which aimed to address the criticisms of the Protestants, clarify and codify Catholic doctrine, and reform the Church from within. The thorny, embarrassing, and highly sensitive issue of holy relics was a major topic of discussion at the council. In its final decrees, the Church strongly and officially reaffirmed its traditional belief in the spiritual value of relics as legitimate aids to piety, stating that it was right and good for the faithful to venerate the mortal remains of the saints and the sacred instruments of Christ's Passion. However, in a significant and direct concession to the critics, they also officially acknowledged that serious and widespread abuses had occurred and needed to be corrected with firm and immediate action. To combat the rampant and damaging problem of forgeries and to restore some measure of credibility to the ancient practice of veneration, the Council of Trent put strict new, legally binding rules in place for the entire Catholic world. It decreed that no new relic could be offered for public veneration without first being rigorously examined and officially authenticated by the local bishop. This new, mandatory authentication process required a thorough investigation into the relic's provenance, or its documented history, to ensure that it had a credible and, if at all possible, an unbroken chain of custody stretching back to a reliable and recognized source. This important decree was specifically aimed at weeding out the obvious and fraudulent fakes that had so disastrously proliferated during the freewheeling religious economy of the late Middle Ages. This was a significant and necessary step. The Church was, in effect, publicly admitting that a serious problem existed and was taking concrete, institutional action to clean its own house. However, this crucial reform only applied to new relics going forward. It did not, and realistically could not, retroactively address the complex and delicate question of the hundreds upon hundreds of fragments of the true cross that were already in circulation and had been venerated as authentic for many centuries. The fundamental and deeply damaging question raised by John Calvin, were there simply far too many of them to possibly be real, remained officially unanswered by the Church's reforms. For the next 300 years, the heated debate over the true cross remained largely in a polarized stalemate, a seemingly unresolvable battle of faith versus skepticism. Calvin's shipload of wood argument continued to hold a powerful sway over the popular and intellectual imagination, often cited by Enlightenment thinkers and later critics as irrefutable, common-sense proof of a massive historical deception. It wasn't until the 19th century, an age of scientific inquiry, historical positivism, and a renewed interest in methodical research, that the first systematic, scientific-minded attempt was made to actually verify or debunk Calvin's famous and long-standing claim. A French scholar named Charles Rolt de Fleury, who was both a respected architect and a devout Catholic, became personally fascinated by the enduring mystery. he decided to undertake a monumental and unprecedented personal project to create a comprehensive, international catalog of all the known and authenticated relics of the true cross in the entire world. Between the years 1870 and 1877, he dedicated himself completely to this immense and challenging task. He traveled extensively across Europe, personally examining many of the most famous relics. He wrote hundreds of letters to dioceses, cathedrals, and monasteries, and painstakingly gathered all the information and measurements he could find. He sought to measure, or obtain accurate measurements of, every single known fragment of the cross that was considered authentic by the Catholic Church. His ambitious and revolutionary goal was to calculate the total combined volume of all the existing relics and then compare it to a scientifically informed estimate of what the original cross's volume would have been. His work, which was published posthumously in a detailed and groundbreaking inventory, was remarkably methodical and objective in its approach. First, he exhaustively researched the likely size, weight, and type of wood of a typical Roman crux used for crucifixion in first-century Palestine. Based on numerous historical sources and archaeological findings of the time, he estimated that the original cross would have had a total volume of approximately 178 million cubic millimeters. Then, he began the long and arduous process of adding up the individual volumes of all the authenticated fragments he could document from his extensive research across Christendom. The final result of his exhaustive, 7-year inventory was absolutely stunning, and it directly and powerfully challenged the very foundation of Calvin's centuries-old accusation. Rolt de Fleury calculated that the combined volume of all the authenticated relics of the true cross that he could find in the entire world amounted to only about 4 million cubic millimeters. This was a tiny, almost insignificant fraction less than 3% off his estimated volume for the entire original cross. Even if one were to be extremely generous in their assumptions and imagine that a huge number of authentic relics were hidden away in private collections or had been lost to history, his findings strongly suggested that the total amount of wood being venerated as the true cross was not nearly enough to build a shipload or even a small boat. In fact, it was far less than the amount needed to constitute a single, complete cross. This scholarly, data-driven inventory was the first serious and credible counterargument to the powerful Reformation-era critique. It suggested that while forgeries certainly existed and were a real and documented problem, the total volume of the authenticated relics was well within the realm of physical possibility. The shipload of wood, it turned out, was not a statement of fact, but a powerful and highly effective exaggeration, a brilliant piece of propaganda that had unfairly and uncritically shaped the debate for far too long. Rolt de Fleury's work did not, and could not, prove that any single fragment was authentic, but it did demonstrate, with compelling evidence, that the widespread belief in their collective fraudulence was based on a critically flawed premise. The case, it seemed, was far from being closed. After journeying through the dramatic and miraculous story of the true cross's discovery, tracing the complex and often politically motivated proliferation of its fragments across a continent, and navigating the stormy, turbulent seas of theological debate and scientific scrutiny, we arrive at the final, and perhaps most profound and illuminating, aspect of this enduring mystery. We must now, for a moment, look beyond the physical splinters of ancient wood and consider the immense, intangible, and undeniable power of the cross as a universal symbol. The story of the true cross is not just a historical whodunit to be solved, nor is it merely a scientific puzzle to be analyzed. It is, at its deepest level, a powerful and sweeping exploration of how a simple geometric shape, an object once synonymous with brutal, state-sanctioned execution, can be utterly and completely transformed into one of the most widely recognized, emotionally resonant, and spiritually significant symbols in all of human history. The enduring power of the cross lies not just in the questionable authenticity of its many physical fragments, but in the deep, complex, and universal meanings that have been inscribed upon it by 2 millennia of unwavering faith, magnificent art, and shared human experience. To fully appreciate the radical nature of this symbolic transformation, It's absolutely crucial to understand that the cross shape itself was not invented by Christianity. It is an ancient, primordial, and profoundly pre-Christian symbol, one of the most basic and intuitive shapes that humans have drawn since the very dawn of time. The simple intersection of two lines, one vertical, one horizontal, is a fundamental form that has appeared independently and spontaneously in countless cultures all around the world, long before the time of Jesus of Nazareth. It has been found etched into the walls of prehistoric caves, carved into ancient Mesopotamian clay tablets, and incorporated into Egyptian hieroglyphs, most famously in the form of the Ankh, the symbol of life. It has appeared in the indigenous art of the Americas and in the spiritual mandalas of Asia. Depending on the specific culture and context, this universal shape could represent a multitude of profound concepts: the four cardinal directions of the compass, the intersection of the earthly, horizontal world and the divine, vertical world, the cyclical changing of the four seasons, or the four fundamental elements of earth, air, fire, and water. It was a symbol with its own rich, diverse, and deeply embedded history long before it was ever associated with a crucifixion in Jerusalem. In the Roman world of the first century, however, the cross had a very specific, unambiguous, and terrifying meaning. It was not a symbol of hope, life, or spirituality. It was the ultimate and most visceral symbol of state-sponsored terror, of public degradation, and of the brutal, uncompromising exercise of imperial power. The cross, or crux in Latin, was the instrument of crucifixion, a form of public execution so agonizing, so prolonged, and so deeply humiliating that it was typically reserved for the lowest and most despised members of society: rebellious slaves, dangerous pirates, political insurgents, and non-Roman citizens convicted of capital crimes. For the early Christians, in the first few centuries following the death of Jesus, the cross was not a symbol they would have readily or proudly embraced. To them, it was a deeply traumatic reminder of a shameful and horrific public death, a potent and painful emblem of Roman oppression. This is why early Christian art, found hidden away in the dark, subterranean catacombs of Rome, very rarely depicts the cross. Instead, these early, persecuted believers preferred more subtle, coded, and hopeful symbols to identify themselves to one another. Symbols like the fish, the ichthys, the anchor, representing hope and stability, or the image of the Good Shepherd. The monumental and historic shift in the perception of the cross began with one man, the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, in the early 4th century. According to the famous legend, recorded by the historian Eusebius, on the eve of a crucial battle for control of the Roman Empire, Constantine had a powerful vision of a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the divine words, in hoc signo vinces, in this sign, you shall conquer. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields, went on to win the battle, and attributed his victory directly to the power of the Christian God. Following this event, Constantine effectively legalized and began to actively promote Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. It was this stunning imperial embrace, combined with his mother Helena's subsequent and highly publicized discovery of the physical true cross in Jerusalem, that completely and forever transformed the symbol's meaning. The cross, once the ultimate symbol of shame, suffering, and execution, was gradually and deliberately rebranded. It was elevated and transformed into the primary, most powerful, and most central symbol of the Christian faith itself. It was no longer the sign of a humiliating death, but the sign of a triumphant, universe-altering victory: Christ's victory over sin and death itself. This was one of the most successful and profound symbolic transformations in all of human history, a complete reversal of meaning that turned an instrument of state terror into the ultimate, universal emblem of hope and salvation. This powerful new symbolism, this new understanding of the cross as a source of divine power and salvation, is precisely what fuels the intense, centuries-long desire for the physical relics of the true cross. For millions of believers throughout history, and even in our modern, more skeptical age, the small, dark, unassuming fragments of wood housed in churches around the world serve the same deep, psychological, and spiritual purpose as the Shroud of Turin. They provide a tangible, physical, and deeply personal connection to the central event of their faith. In a religion that is often based on abstract theological concepts, ancient texts, and faith in the unseen, a physical object that you can see, be in the presence of, and perhaps even touch, holds an immense and almost magical power. To stand in the presence of a piece of the true cross is not just to look at a historical artifact. For a sincere believer, it is to feel a direct, unbroken, physical link across 2,000 years of history to the sacrifice of Jesus on the hill of Golgotha. It is to feel physically closer to the very heart of the Christian story. This deep, powerful, and instinctual human desire for a tangible connection to the divine, for a way to make the spiritual feel physical and real, is the fundamental reason why relics like the true cross hold such immense and enduring emotional and spiritual power that, for many, remains potent and undiminished, even in the face of serious and legitimate historical and scientific doubts. The early Church Fathers, who were not naive men but were in fact brilliant theologians, philosophers, and thinkers, were not unaware of the logical and practical problems that would inevitably arise from the ongoing division and worldwide proliferation of the cross fragments. They could easily foresee that sharp-witted critics, like John Calvin centuries later, would one day arise to ask the very simple and very damaging question of how a single cross could possibly produce so many pieces. Faced with this potential and seemingly unresolvable paradox, they developed a sophisticated and elegant theological explanation, one that addressed the issue not through the limited lens of history or science, but through the boundless lens of faith and the concept of miracles. They proposed an idea that came to be known as the miracle of the wood. This doctrine suggested that the true cross, by virtue of having been in direct physical contact with the body of Christ, was imbued with a unique and supernatural property. It could, they argued, be divided infinitely without ever diminishing its original, whole substance. A tiny splinter, in this theological view, was not just a small part of the cross. It mystically contained the full sanctity, the complete essence, and the undiluted power of the entire original cross. This was, of course, a profound statement of faith, not a claim of physics. It was a theological solution to a pressing logistical and philosophical problem. It provided a framework that allowed the Church to distribute the precious and highly sought-after relic far and wide, satisfying the immense spiritual demand from the faithful across Christendom without ever having to worry about running out of the sacred material or diluting its power. This idea, while it may seem like a convenient and self-serving explanation to a modern skeptic, was a powerful, comforting, and widely accepted concept in the medieval world. It transformed the cross from a finite, physical object into an infinite and inexhaustible source of divine grace, a sacred substance that could be shared with the entire world without ever being depleted. However, the enduring and pervasive power of the cross in our world today extends far beyond the veneration of its physical, wooden fragments. Over the centuries, the simple image of the cross itself has become one of the most instantly recognized and culturally loaded symbols on the entire planet. It has long since transcended its purely religious origins to become a universal symbol that carries with it a host of complex and often contradictory meanings. It is seen on the flags of dozens of nations, on the protective emblems of great humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and as a deeply personal statement of faith or even fashion, worn as jewelry by billions of people. For Christians, it represents not just the historical event of the crucifixion, but an entire universe of profound and deeply personal ideas. It is a symbol of immense and unjust suffering, but it is also a symbol of unconditional and redemptive love. It is a symbol of absolute sacrifice, but also of ultimate and triumphant redemption. It is a symbol of despair and death, but also of eternal hope and resurrection. Its simple, elegant, and balanced form has the remarkable capacity to hold all of these powerful, dualistic meanings simultaneously. The power of the cross as a universal symbol is now almost entirely independent of the authenticity of any single physical piece of wood. It has taken on a life of its own in the collective human imagination, a powerful and enduring testament to the ability of a simple shape to convey the most complex and profound aspects of the human condition. Ultimately, this brings us to the final, and perhaps most crucial, point in understanding the intractable mystery of the true cross. Unlike a complex and data-rich artifact like the Shroud of Turin, which contains a wealth of detailed and scientifically testable information from its bizarre photographic negative properties to its unique chemical composition, a simple piece of wood is almost impossible to definitively prove or disprove as authentic. The very simplicity of the relic is what paradoxically guarantees its eternal mystery. Scientific tests can be, and have been, performed on the various fragments. As we've seen, they can show that the wood is of a type like olive wood that was common in ancient Palestine. This finding is consistent with authenticity, but it is certainly not definitive proof. They can use radiocarbon dating to try and determine its age, but as we saw with the famous Titulus Crucis relic in Rome, the results can be controversial and may only be testing a later, medieval copy created for veneration. And even if a fragment were to be conclusively carbon dated to the 1st century, what would that truly prove? It would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it is a piece of 2,000-year-old olive wood from the Middle East. It could never, ever prove that it was from this specific cross, the one used to crucify Jesus of Nazareth, as opposed to the thousands upon thousands of other wooden crosses used by the Romans for executions during that brutal period. There is no divine DNA, no historical fingerprint that can be lifted from a simple piece of wood to link it to a specific individual. The final, definitive link is missing and, in all likelihood, will always be missing. The authenticity of the true cross, therefore, can likely never be fully resolved by science. It will always, and perhaps by its very nature, must always, remain purely a matter of personal faith. It is an object that requires belief not just to be venerated, but for its very identity to be accepted. And it is in that vast, unprovable space, between historical possibility and the necessary leap of faith, that the enduring and untouchable power of its mystery truly lies. Ultimately, the story of the true cross transcends the simple, earthly question of authenticity. Its enduring power no longer resides in the carbon atoms of the physical wood, but in the monumental, world-altering symbol it has become. The cross shape itself is ancient, a primal mark found etched into the artifacts of countless pre-Christian cultures. Yet, through the searing narrative of Christ's passion and the epic quest of Empress Helena, this simple intersection of two lines underwent the most profound alchemy in symbolic history. What was once a gruesome public instrument of state terror, a raw symbol of degradation, public shame, and unimaginable suffering, was transmuted. It was reborn as the ultimate emblem of the Christian faith, representing a divine sacrifice, the promise of redemption, and a love powerful enough to conquer death itself. The physical relic became the anchor for this monumental shift. For millions of believers across centuries of war, plague, and progress, these tangible fragments provided a necessary, sacred bridge. They grounded an abstract theological concept in something that could be seen, touched, and venerated, bringing a cosmic event down to a human scale. To be in the presence of a piece of the true cross was to feel a direct, unbroken line to the very moment that defined their faith, to breathe the same air as a miracle. Confronted with the logistical nightmare of how one cross could be in so many places, the early church fathers proposed a solution of breathtaking theological genius: the miracle of the wood. They suggested the true cross was imbued with a miraculous property, a divine blessing that allowed it to be divided infinitely without ever diminishing its original substance or sanctity. This was not a clumsy attempt to hide a fraud, but a beautiful, faith-based affirmation that the power of God could not be constrained by the mundane laws of physics. In the end, this is where science must fall silent. A simple piece of wood is almost impossible to definitively prove or disprove. Scientific tests can suggest it's the right type of wood. Olive wood from Palestine, and carbon dating can place it in the correct era. But science can never bridge that final, sacred inch. It can never prove that this specific cross held the body of Christ. Its authenticity, therefore, will likely always remain on the precipice between history and holiness, a question answered not by microscopes, but by faith. This very ambiguity is what gives the cross its vibrant, living legacy in our modern world. The pilgrimage of Empress Helena is no longer a unique imperial quest. It is mirrored in the millions of modern pilgrims who brave crowded airports and walk ancient stone paths to stand in Jerusalem, Rome, or before a humble reliquary in a local church. They are not seeking to prove history with a checklist. They are seeking to experience a personal, transformative connection. In an era awash with digital noise and cynical deconstruction, the primal human need for the sacred, for the tangible, doesn't disappear, it intensifies. The search has evolved. It is no longer for the object itself, but for the feeling the object promises. However, this legacy is not without its deep shadows. Beyond the quiet piety of the pilgrim, the cross has been hoisted as a potent and often controversial symbol in the turbulent arenas of culture and politics. It is not always a simple sign of faith. It is brandished as a marker of national identity, a banner in political movements, and sometimes a cudgel of exclusion in bitter cultural wars. The story of the true cross, a relic once captured in battle and fought over by empires, is a stark reminder that this simple shape continues to be a focal point for both profound unity and deep, painful division. The debate that John Calvin ignited with his pen is now a perpetual firestorm on the digital battlefield. In the cacophony of online voices, every theory is amplified, every shred of evidence put on a perpetual trial by comment section. Our modern hunger for a definitive answer, for absolute proof or absolute refutation, is as ferocious as the faith that inspired the relic's veneration in the first place. Ultimately, the trail of history grows cold. The instruments of science fall silent. The story of the true cross leaves the modern individual standing at a crossroads of their own. With all the historical evidence, scientific data, and theological arguments laid bare, the final verdict is not delivered by a pope or a scientist, but in the quiet, inner court of personal conscience. The enduring legacy of the relic is not the wood itself, but the powerful, eternal question it forces upon us. It asks us to look past the splinter of wood and into ourselves and decide, in the vast, sacred space between what can be proven and what must be felt, where do we choose to build our faith? The story of the true cross is a journey from a gruesome tool of execution to the most revered symbol of a global faith. While science and history cast serious doubt on the authenticity of the countless fragments, their power remains undiminished for believers. Whether a historical reality or a powerful myth, the true cross reminds us that the greatest relics are often not the objects themselves, but the enduring stories and the powerful faith they inspire. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together.